Hi, so I'm Alex Komoroske.
I'm Max Heinritz.
We're two product managers on the Chrome's Open Web Platform team. Now, most of this session is going to be just questions and answers from you guys. You'll see there's that Google Moderator link up there. You can leave questions on there, or you can ask them live, whichever you prefer. But that's what we'll spend most of our time on. Before that, Max and I are going to give you just talk for a couple of minutes about Blink and sort of the progress we've made in the past month. So it's kind of crazy, but it's only been a little bit over a month since we announced Blink. And Blink, for those of you who don't know, is a new rendering engine originally based on Webkit that we're using in Chromium. The mission statement of Blink is to improve the open web through technical innovation and good citizenship. So I'm going to talk about the technical innovation part, and Max will talk briefly about the good citizenship part. So when we made the decision to create Blink, it was a really hard one that we had to come to terms with. But it came down to fundamentally that Chromium used a different multi-process architecture from other WebKit-based browsers. And that increased complexity not just for the Chromium team, but for everybody who is using WebKit. So we mentioned back when we made the announcement that we anticipated we could remove about 4.5 million lines from the code base. And that was things like build systems for other ports, JavaScript core, because we use V8, some of the WebKit 2 porting layer, and a number of other things. But the progress we've made since then has really blown our minds, kind of. In fact, we've removed now, I think, 8.8 million lines of code. So that's just a really cool stat, I think, that shows that we've been able to streamline this even more than we expected. That's 63% of the repo, I think, and it's also 191 megabytes of code. So less code is better for developers because it means that people who are working on Blink, they can check out the code base faster, they can build faster, and of course, less code is less surface area for bugs. And it hasn't just actually been us that's seen this kind of been able to clean up like this. The WebKit project as well has really been able to clean out some stuff that was really just there for Chromium. So it's been really great for both projects. These are just really easy stats to pull. What actually really matters is developer productivity and how much stuff we can do to improve the stability and performance of Blink. But what I'm most excited about actually is not just the performance or the developer productivity, but some of the cool new experiments that we've been able to start that we couldn't have done before. So one of those is a project called OilPan. And this is just, again, an experiment into seeing if we can move the DOM nodes into a garbage collected heap. So today the DOM nodes, use a reference counting system, and it interacts in a very complex way with the JavaScript engine. And so if this works, it could really help make that much simpler and much easier to understand and less error prone. Another cool one is called lazy block layout. Again, a very early experiment. The idea is, what if we could make very large but simple layouts much, much faster to do? So if you're only using a handful of features, why can't we make that much, much faster? And this would allow, if it works, this would allow things like infinite scrolling lists to be much easier to accomplish on the web platform. So those are literally just two totally random examples of experiments that we've started in the past month or so with Blink that we're really excited about. There's a whole bunch of other ones. All the stuff about these and the other ones are on our mailing list.
Cool. Thanks, Alex. So Alex talked a lot about how Blink enables technical innovation. But it's important to balance that momentum with interoperability. We want the whole web to evolve, not just Chrome. That's where the second half of our mission statement comes in, good citizenship. I'm going to talk about a couple of our initiatives in this area and how they might be relevant to you guys as web developers. The first thing I want to point out is that all of our code is open source, so you can go to our project page, chromium.org/blink, to download that. I'll show a link at the end. The next thing I want to talk about is our transparent launch review process. Launch review process is healthy for projects in many different ways. For us, it's important for external contributors to understand how they can work with our team to land their code in the code base. It's also important to build consensus early on in the development process and avoid conflicts later. And finally, and this one is really important for us, we don't want to ship proprietary features, and the launch process helps avoid doing that. Basically, when we ship something in Chrome and the web platform, we want all browsers to ship it, not just Chrome. So the way this works in practice is, say you're a Blink engineer and you want to add a web platform feature or somehow change the behavior we expose to web developers. Before you start writing code, we ask you to first send an intent to implement email to our public mailing list, Blink Dev. This email follows a template format. We ask you to provide a link to the specification, a description of use cases and motivation, and finally, give an overview of compatibility risk. In that last section, what we're looking for is, do other browser vendors think this feature is a good idea? Is it making progress through the standardization process? And usually there's some discussion that follows about whether this is something that belongs in Blink or not. Later, when the feature is ready to ship, we ask them to send another email, an intent to ship email, which is scrutinized a little bit more carefully. It's only been about a month or so, but this launch process seems to be working pretty well. We've had 40 of these intent threads, and of those, we're proud to say that a third have come from non-Googlers. We've had intent threads come from people like Intel, Adobe, Opera, and earlier this week, Microsoft. So pretty exciting stuff. One thing I want to point out before we move on is that this process isn't designed to prevent us from shipping things only in Chrome. It's designed to force us to be very deliberate and thoughtful if we ever decide to do that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing I want to point out is that everything I just talked about is public. You can participate and follow along in our public mailing list, blinkdev@chromium.org. But at the same time, I understand that not everyone has the time to follow all of the intricacies of browser development. And so there are a couple other ways that you can stay up to date on what we're working on that don't involve so much traffic. So I'll talk about them and order them on this slide from most traffic at the top, which is BlinkDev, to the ones with less noise at the bottom. So in addition to BlinkDev, we have a cool site called chromestatus.com, which I'll show you guys now. Basically, this is a spreadsheet. Ooh, the resolution isn't very good right now. Basically, this is a spreadsheet where each row corresponds to a feature that we're currently working on or recently shipped. There's some logistical information like the feature's name, who the owner is, the bugs, its implementation status in Chromium. And then over here, the cells are colored. And these columns correspond to things that we think reflect web citizenship. So for example, progress through standardization, the views of other browser vendors, the excitement from web developers. And our goal with this is to have a nice visual representation of how each feature reflects our web citizenship. And then as you scroll down, you can kind of see the project's overall web citizenship just based on these colors. So right now, this is just an iframed Google spreadsheet, but we're hoping to make progress here. I'll point out how you can actually subscribe to get email notifications when there's changes made. Just go in here and enable notification rules, and you can get emails to stay up to date. I also want to point out that we've gotten great community help with this spreadsheet. Is Masataka here from Japan? Yeah, Masataka has been an enormous help, and we actually haven't met in person yet, so it'd be great if you could come up after the talk. But yeah, it's really awesome to see people coming together to help build this set of information. OK, back to the slides. So those are two ways you can stay up to date on features. A third way is through our developer relations team. They have Google+ and Twitter channels that you can follow. And then finally, every time we launch a new Chrome beta, we publish a Chromium blog post, which describes all of the web platform changes. And that includes things like deprecations, which might be relevant to you guys. So these are a couple ways that you can stay up to date on what's going on in Blink. Again, you can get this information on our project page. So the last thing I want to talk about before we turn it over to Q&A is web platform feature adoption. Google's in a pretty unique place in terms of understanding how people are using the web. We want to make this information available to other people who might be interested in it. So what you're looking at here is data from Google Search Index. Basically what we did is we ran a grep over all of the pages that we have and tried to look for new HTML element tags. And so this top line, for example, is header. And you can see that usage has increased from something like 7% of web pages a couple months ago to near 9% now. So this graph is just kind of useful information. But we're trying to get the similar data for CSS and for JavaScript APIs. And this could be useful in a couple ways that I'll just list out now. One is, say you're a browser engineer and you're trying to optimize CSS. It would be pretty useful to have a list of all of the CSS properties and their frequency across the web so that you can know which code paths would be most efficient to optimize. Another example is, say you're a specification editor, and you want to know if you can make breaking changes to the spec without breaking the web. This would help you feel comfortable doing that. For web developers, it's just interesting to see what's reaching the mainstream and what they can use in their websites. And finally, this is important for us as the Blink team, is that we can get information on when we can responsibly deprecate features. And so a good example of this is with prefixed versus unprefixed features. Oftentimes, when we release an unprefixed version of a feature, we can't remove support for the prefixed version because the web would break. And so we're stuck with this old code path for the prefix version when we really don't need it anymore because we have the unprefixed version. And so we can use this system to track the not only adoption of new features, but also decline of old features, and know when we can feel comfortable removing them. So this is the project page I was referencing, chromium.org/blink. Go there, there's a bunch of information. And then just to summarize real quick, Alex talked a lot about how Blink enables technical innovation on the web. And I talked about how it's important to stay good citizens and make sure that that innovation goes both ways, both from the community to Blink and from Blink to the community. So now we have time for some Q&A, and I'm going to invite some people from the team up.
So Darin, Eric, and Paul, you want to talk?
Yeah. So we have a Dory, and we're taking questions from the audience too. Sorry, a Google Moderator, and we're taking questions from the audience too. So do you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Sure. Sorry. My name is Paul Irish. I'm a developer advocate for Chrome.
My name's Eric Seidel. I work on Blink.
Hi, my name's Darin Fisher. I'm an engineering lead on Chrome.
Okay, so you guys are welcome to come up to the microphones if you have any questions. Otherwise, we'll just run through the Dory. Let's start with an audience question.
One thing I want to know, like, when Blink is coming to Android WebView, like right now there's a WebView Classic is there, and there's support for if you install Chrome, then WebView defaults to Chrome. But when Blink will become a default WebView on Android?
So actually, if you follow the chromium.org project, you can see that there's an Android WebView project being built there. You can actually check out the code and try it yourself. What I can say is that it's under development. We're very interested, of course, in bringing the best of the Chromium engine and Blink included to Android, and that includes not only Chrome on Android, but also the WebView implementation.
Right now, the code which is in Android underscore WebView, there's a test shell there which you can build. I guess like it doesn't work, or at least it's kind of like partly implemented, right?
So in terms of developing Blink on Android, generally we actually use content shell. That's sort of the new way. Okay. Test shell was the old way. And you're right, both of them are under a lot of flux right now after the Blink transition. And I think you'll see those stabilize in the coming months.
Okay, cool.
Hi, my question is about vendor prefixes. So Blink won't be having them and instead opting for kind of like a dev gate for experimental features. Now, some prefixed CSS properties are older than Chrome itself and are still prefixed in Chrome. So, however, I've been deploying them in apps for many years now. So my worry with this new policy is that the only saving grace of vendor prefixes will be lost, that I won't get to push new web platform features to users in a near-term time frame. So my question is, how aggressively is the Chrome team going to be locking away these experimental features behind this, this dev wall?
So I'll take the first part of that question. To start with, vendor prefixes, as many of you, probably most of you know, are when it says Webkit -foo as a property or as a value. And we in Blink are trying to avoid that. We don't want to introduce yet another Blink-foo. Vendor prefixes are just like any other API that we've shipped, and we don't want to break. But so we have been measuring, like Max has said, to make sure that we don't break your website as we work to remove these. And most of that policy is about forward-looking, that we don't want to add new ones, and we'll be trying to remove the existing ones as we find that we can, as their usage falls off.
Yeah. So I think a second part of your question as well is this concern that the prefixing system used to allow new emerging web standards or features to be deployed before they were fully standardized. And that allows you to play with all these great goodies. The problem is that prefixing was supposed to be a warning to developers of don't rely on this, it might go away at any time. But it's just like any other API where people start using it, and then if you turn it off, the web breaks. And so with this process, it definitely places more, it's definitely something where we have to push a little bit harder and talk with people like Mozilla, for example, the guy behind you in line there, to talk about features. And hey, we think this is a great feature. What are your plans? If Mozilla says, yeah, we love this too, like, awesome. If there's a spec, awesome. But it definitely will require us to push a little bit harder to make sure that other browser vendors are interested in the same things that we're interested in turning on.
Do you think that the pace of progress might slow down as a result?
I think that's a great question. I think that we're very fortunate that we're not alone in having a 6-week release cycle. And if you look at Mozilla, they also have an accelerated release cycle, and they also have a desire to not ship vendor prefix features. And I think this means that, and since they also have a desire to improve the web platform, it seems like we have this wonderful opportunity to capitalize on this shared ambition to improve the platform, and not just litter it with a bunch of Moz Dash and WebKit Dash, but to actually do, or Blink Dash, to actually do the right thing and move quickly. And so actually, in many ways, I feel like we can actually do a better job than we could in the past. Because in the past, what did we do? We added something, and then when another vendor came along, they wanted to do it a little differently, and then we added yet another way to do it, and you end up with multiple different ways of doing the same thing. For example, we have like 3 different ways in CSS of expressing gradients. That's not fun. And so it seems really promising now that, like I said, with Mozilla on the 6-month release cycle, 6-week release cycle, and Chrome on a 6-week release cycle, that we could be able to do the right thing and quicker.
I guess I'll also add that there's been kind of browser vendors and standards groups have felt a greater urgency to get things done and get it shipped and available to users recently. The CSS working group in particular has identified that getting things to candidate rec, which is the point at which, like, basically, you know, there's multi-vendor interest in implementations out there, that is a key target to get done within a year. And so standards groups really want to make sure that things are accelerated and still, you know, everyone had a chance and developers have a chance to give feedback. At the same time, you know, browser vendors don't want, you know, a bunch of features to be locked behind this one flag for years, right? We want to make sure that they ship out too. So everyone kind of has, now I think this model is really good because we're not able to ship a feature that just kind of sits out there in prefix land forever. It's not shipped, and so we want it to get out there, and we're going to do the legwork to make sure that it reaches the standardization goals so that it can actually get to users. But it's going to, I expect that, you know, you're going to see things quick. You're not going to have to, you're going to have it available for your users as soon as we can make it happen.
That all sounds fantastic. Thanks a lot, guys.
Let's do one question from the Dory. Oh,
that's right.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to know what the expected user flow was for enabling these features. Is there a way that we can kind of prompt users to say, hey, I'm going to use this special feature, say on a Chrome experiment site, and get a little bit easier interaction so they don't have to go to like Chrome flags and
so that's
enable it
actually
deeper?
Intentional. About flags
I
is a little bit scary for end users, and we know that, and that's one of the reasons that's the place you go in to flip it. Otherwise, it just becomes, you convince all your users, all the users everywhere to flip their experimental flags on, and now that's de facto. And so we are definitely trying to figure out how to balance this, right? So you want people to be able to use the features, to use them in real life websites and give feedback to standardization to other browser vendors. But you also don't want to get them stuck with sort of a bad implementation that you can't change.
No, I definitely understand that. With prefixes, it was a transparent process. With a notification, then it's a user opt-in. And major websites aren't going to ask the user to enable 100 different experimental things. But I'm afraid that it might change the way that experimentations with the new features are exposed. If it's only developers that are going in and changing those flags, then you're not going to get as much community interest from the non-developers.
I mean, here's one way to look at it. Before Blink, it was a little bit more difficult for us to experiment with web platform features, and now we have the ability to more easily put things in behind a flag, and that allows us to not only get an implementation experience, but also allows developers, web developers, to try it more easily. Previously, if we wanted to do that kind of thing, often it meant, doing a branch of Chromium and then trying to get somebody to download that custom build. It was a lot harder to get the feedback that we need from web developers. So really, hopefully this accelerates the feedback process and improves that's a big part of the standardization process, is getting web developers to chime in and give their input. And being able to actually try out an implementation is key to that, but also to be able to try without making that long-term commitment that we do have when we release a feature. And as I think others on the panel have said, when we ship something with a vendor prefix, it was just as much of a commitment to the web community as an API that was unprefixed. It doesn't really matter that it's in some standard somewhere. If we put it there and people start depending on it, we're stuck with it. It's part of the platform, like it or not. And so we just wanted to sort of turn that around and focus on trying to do the right thing and not creating this mess, more of this mess.
Thank you. Flexbox is a pretty good example of that. But
Okay, let's do one question from the moderator, and then we'll take another audience question. So the question is, Chrome on Windows has had issues with web font rendering for a long time now, even with Google Web Fonts. Is solving these issues a priority on Blink?
Absolutely. I think this was specifically asking about fonts on Windows? Yeah. Yeah, actually we have work underway to add support for subpixel positioning of fonts on Windows. We have that enabled on other platforms. The challenge on Windows is just that the GDI, the font rendering system that we have been using, doesn't support it, and we're working to move to direct write. The challenge with direct write is our sandbox architecture kind of works against the way direct write works. And so, however, there's a solution to that, and it's in development now, and so it should be available behind a flag shortly, if not, in a canary shortly after.
Cool. Audience question? Let's go here.
Yeah, so, in building on what you talked about getting the new APIs out quicker in a year, and, I'm obviously familiar with that and worked with you guys on several things. In the future, a few years from now, lots more APIs will be in the web platform. And Paul, you talked about it as the platform and the platform. I guess my question is, with BoottoGecko, we want to start a conversation with everyone. And have you guys felt internally those urges of, hey, what about when we land these powerful features that give us parity with things people are able to do on apps on the phone and stuff like that in these native languages? Have you talked about what comes next outside of the browser or the web being a foundation for a device like a phone, anything like that?
It sounds like, as you probably know, we have the Chrome packaged app system, and there's a lot of overlap there with BoottoGecko. I don't know if you were here for the previous talk. Eric answered a similar question about SysApps working group and standardization of these sort of web platform extensions that are designed to allow you to build apps that live in that native app style sandbox as opposed to the drive-by web style sandbox. And I think it's absolutely a really rich area to explore, collaboration and finding ways to, standardize and agree on what these APIs look like. It seems like there's sort of early days for some of these platforms, and I know that our team has been talking with folks at Mozilla and trying to find commonalities, trying to learn more about how each other's thinking about it.
Yeah, I just had to ask after seeing the giant Chrome Android.
We think the web is pretty cool. So that wasn't clear.
Let's do a live question over here.
I'm a bit curious about resources on the Blink team. So now that you started up the Blink project, the Opera guys has joined too. What does this mean in terms of resources on the team? Are you scaling up the team internally to invest more resources into Blink and the rendering engine? Or are you going to continue at the same pace? What does it mean that Opera has joined the project?
So I think the bigger wins have come less from us hiring more people, because as far as I know, I haven't seen a lot of new people being hired, and more just there's a certain budget of complexity for a project. There's only so many things you can do. And when we were in Webkit, we had to do 101 things that we just didn't need to do. And now we just got rid of those 101 things, and so now we can take that same complexity budget and spend it on much more interesting features for you guys on getting features to you faster, on doing interesting things like runtime flags. And so I don't see our team size changing very quickly. These guys would know better than I. But we suddenly have a whole lot more mind share to spread around.
I would just add that we love to grow the team with talented engineers who are interested in improving the web platform.
Okay.
Another live question.
So my question involves the divergence from Webkit. You know, right now when we're building websites, you know, you check it against IE, you check it against a WebKit browser. You know, you should test it against both Chrome and Safari, but for the most part, WebKit is WebKit, and all WebKit browsers render things pretty much the same way. Moving forward, as Chrome and Blink adds features, you know, like the WebMIDI API that WebKit is opposed to, how, I don't want to say fragmentation, but you know, how can we kind of move forward from, you know, this kind of world we're in now, and where, you know, we have to check against all these different rendering engines if we keep adding features to some rendering engines that other ones just do not want to do at all.
So to be clear on that specific example, Max was talking earlier about our intent to implement versus intent to ship. So it's very different. So the intent to ship is, yes, we are ready to commit to this forever, basically. Intent to implement is, yeah, we think this is interesting. We think that this could be something we want to ship. It's worthwhile to get the experience of implementing it, getting it in the hands of developers behind a flag, and playing around with it. So WebMIDI has had its intent to implement on Blink Dev, and I said it looks interesting. I mean, we're a little bit concerned about some of the issues that you just talked about. And before we'd ever ship it by default, we'd have to very carefully weigh those kinds of things. So throughout all of this, we want to minimize that compatibility risk. Because every time that there's a feature that you can target in one browser that you can't target in others, that hurts compatibility a little bit. And so we're very aware of that. And we think about it basically throughout all these decisions. It's one of the primary things in our heads. One other area that we can help address this, by the way, is testing. So to some extent, one of the reasons that you have to do a lot of testing is because browsers implement different standards slightly differently, or maybe the standard wasn't clear on something or was ambiguous in some area. But actually having better testing can help you just, the different browser vendors, just make sure they work the same. And if you find something where they both work differently, but they both are within the terms of the spec, well, the spec has a bug. Fix that bug in the spec, and figure out what the right behavior is. And so we're looking into working with a bunch of other folks to improve coverage of testing that many of the different browser vendors can run. I think that's a really great long-term solution to this kind of problem.
And I guess the other part of this is to your question, where there's not the same feature parity across browsers. I mean, this has kind of been the case for a while, and even if we do have all browsers shipping the same features, there's going to be a different release schedule at least. So I mean, I think feature detection is the right way to handle this. There's going to be an uneven surface if you're developing against the edge of the web, where there are features present in some cases and not in other places. In some cases, you know, the experience can degrade. You don't need that feature to deliver the experience, and that's awesome when you can do that. In other cases, you can find a polyfill, you can find some other way to handle it. But I guess that's kind of the way to deal with that.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, when we forked WebKit to create the Blink project, when it comes to new features like, say, something like WebMIDI, it's not that that if we had stayed on WebKit, there was any promise that Apple was actually going to ship WebMIDI. We had developed many features for WebKit that Apple had yet to ship. And so really, we sort of feel like the better path is to just, if we care about a feature, we want to get it out there and get developers using it, and it's really through that excitement and energy around the feature and the cool things that people build with it, that's what will convince the other browsers to come along if they're not already convinced. So there's always this sort of tug and pull and push and pull kind of dynamic. Any rate, Blink is largely about allowing us to more efficiently move the web platform forward.
All right, thank you very much.
Cool, thanks for the question. Okay, let's do one question from the moderator. What change, feature, or improvement are you personally most excited about the possibility of implementing in Blink?
One of the ones that I'm psyched about, I think, Eric, you might have mentioned this one. I don't think it's under development. You can tell me, but multi-threaded style recalc and layout. It's going to be awesome. So like one thing, I'll tell you a little bit of background. So let's say a lot of times you open up the Chrome DevTools, you'll do a timeline, and you'll be identifying what your bottleneck is. And in a lot of cases, like there's a lot of time spent in layout, sometimes in style recalc, depending on how much heavy DOM manipulation you're doing. And this is, pretty much, it's single-threaded from going from style recalc out to seeing something on the screen. And it can slow down your app. So being able to basically take some of these operations and throw them to a separate thread or a separate core, I'm totally jazzed about those experiments.
He stole my answer. But I'm actually also really excited about the oil pan stuff that you saw mentioned. And that's not something I'm personally working on. I'm working more on the rendering side of things, making things really fast for your website. But oilpan gives us all sorts of potential performance benefits, all sorts of potential memory benefits, potential security benefits, and is kind of way out there from a feature. But us being our own entity, having our own experimental branches, being able to do this sort of thing iteratively and quickly is really exciting to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love both of those experiments. And I was just a little bit surprised that you didn't mention out-of-process iframes on the slide, Alex. So yeah, that to me is one of my one of the dreams I've always had for Chrome's multi-process architecture, that it could not just sandbox tabs, but actually sandbox origins. And to me, it's just really exciting. So the idea of turning Blink into more of a frame server, if you will, like in the iframe sense, and allowing us to isolate origins to their own processes is just, I think it's just going to be fabulous, from, especially in this cloud world, this world where most of your data is in the cloud. The sandbox that we have in Chrome is fabulous at allowing users to be protected against malicious web content that might try to exploit a bug to persist malware on your computer. It's great at that, protecting against that, but a lot of the valuable data that users have is right there in the cloud, and our sandbox doesn't do anything to help protect that data. But if we were able to isolate origins into their own processes, then, man, that would be a huge step forward for web security.
I'm gonna do another one.
You can have mine.
All right. Lazy block layout. So it came up on the slide, but I think so far we haven't had a great explanation. So stop me if I screw this up. But let's say you have like a list view. You have this view, especially on mobile device. You'll have a bunch of items, and what you want your user to do is be able to basically like fling it with their thumb, and it still respond great. And it's been challenging. There's been all these hacks to make this work fantastic on the web platform. And lazy block layout is targeting this use case of, I got a lot of items, I want to fling it, and it to be responsive and awesome. And so you can read about the proposal on BlinkDev, but it's targeting something that developers are dealing with a lot, and something baking into a platform solution for that.
Do you have something?
I'll just say, it's nothing that, it's just not particularly Blink, I guess. Oh yeah. Is just web components. If you've seen me in past years, we're talking about those again and again, and we're going to have another session tomorrow to talk about it, but I think web components are an amazing set of emerging standards that are really going to change how people write web apps.
Another thing we're working on is web animations, and this is a unified animation model for the web, and it's unclear how the Webkit community would have responded to this, but it's something that Blink gives us the ability to do on our own because we think it's a good idea. And so this will make animations much faster, and the cool stuff you saw with Maps and Google+, users are really looking for a rich interactive experience, and we need to provide that in a performant way. And web animations will make that possible.
That's, again, another emerging spec that's being worked on with folks from Mozilla and Adobe and others.
Right. Okay. Anything else? Cool. Let's do a live question.
So on deprecating features, you guys use counter to measure stats on the web. Then I'm wondering what the usage stats of the WebView apps. So, because the code used for WebView apps tends to more depending on Webkit prefix or like a Apple-specific properties or methods. So the usage stats tends to be different from the ones on the web. So do you guys plan for like introducing a use counter for WebView or?
So one thing I want to point out too is there's lots of different methods of trying to figure this out, and not one of them is perfect. And so the hope is that by doing multiple methods, you can get something that in aggregate is pretty good. So if you're looking just at something in the web index, you're only going to see the HTML that was passed down from the server originally. And if you are running, there's lots of other approaches and techniques to get this information, and all of them have some drawbacks. That's a great one about WebViews using slightly different APIs in different ways. It's a great point.
Yeah, I'm not sure that to answer your question about use counter and WebView, I'm not actually sure if we have a solution for that. It would be fabulous to be able to get the underlying data. What we have in Chrome is a histogram system that allows us to collect usage stats for users who opt in. So when they download Chrome, they check a box and say, yeah, I'd happily allow you to collect anonymous stats to help make Chrome better. And that's the kind of system that allows us to record actual usage of features and take advantage of that to try to learn what's not actually being used. It's certainly not capturing things like WebView apps, because those apps don't prompt their users to opt them into that system. There might be opportunities to leverage, Chrome Dev Channel, Chrome Beta Channel, or if there's ever a Canary on Android for that sort of thing, but we don't have that yet. It is a challenge. We also, with Chrome apps in the Chrome store, we have the ability to crawl that data and find usage of web platform features, and we have used that in the past to find things that would be unfortunate to remove.
And ultimately, if we mess up, the hope is that when it's in Dev Channel or Beta Channel, someone will say, "Oh, you just broke all these sites," and oops, we can roll that back. So.
Nice.
Let's do another slide from the moderator. Let's do another question from the moderator. Question is, there are various inconsistencies in the security policy enforcements between Firefox and Chrome, like with cross-domain fonts and XHR on local files. Will you be working together to be more consistent?
Yes.
Next question.
I should also note that before this presentation, I emailed Pamela, and I will get her bugs, and I will make sure that we work on them.
Cool. All right. Let's do a live question. Do you know which of you is first? OK, go ahead.
Regarding the better integration between DOM elements and JavaScript, what kind of performance improvements can we expect, especially with elements that are pretty complex, such as Canvas, and what would be the timeline there?
Were you referring to the oil pan project that we were talking about with memory management?
I think I read something about exposing thinner layer around DOM elements to JavaScript, and all the calls into those elements would be faster, and I guess that would have improvements for objects like Canvas.
So Canvas is drawing to the screen or drawing to a buffer, and the vast majority of that time is all spent like actually splitting the pixels and turning them red and blue and stuff. So the stuff where you were referring to about making the DOM be able to talk to JavaScript faster, that all affects more things like when you're traversing your whole document, or you're doing a really tight loop and constantly calling some DOM API. Talking to Canvas, if we have performance bugs there, and I'm sure we do, those are more things that we would talk to our graphics team and help make our blurs faster and our fills faster and those sorts of things. And we want to fix those too, so we'd love to know about them.
OK, audience question.
Yes, just had a quick question about the Blink project. How do you go from implemented feature to shipping that feature, especially if you're not part of Google?
So the intention, it's all done via email.
Okay.
There might be additional meetings to review it if it needs more talking back and forth. And of course, in that case, whoever's implementing it would be invited to those meetings to video conference. And our goal is that people, that even non-Googlers can be full peers in this project, and we take that very seriously.
I believe there's been some intent to ships from folks outside of Google.
I'm pretty sure that's true.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the intent to ships. We've definitely had in-template influence. Like I said, over a third have come from non-Googlers. So we try to make everything really well documented because we understand that this is an important thing for an open source project. So our project page is chromium.org/blink, and we explain everything on there.
And we keep it up to date as we're learning, because we're only a month or so into this, and so we're trying to figure out what's the best way to balance a minimum of process so you don't have to have all kinds of crazy overhead, but also be transparent and easy to follow and allow external contributors to be to be peers in the process and all that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, second question. How do you become a committer? Is it just like Webkit, or is it slightly different? Or
It's just like Webkit, maybe
Okay.
even easier. There's a Chromium committers policy. It's like 10 commits, sometimes sooner.
Okay, thanks.
I think that's all the time we have. I guess, like I said, feel free to join us on our mailing list, blinkdev at Chromium, or go to our project page for more information. And we'll hang out for a couple minutes after if you have other questions. Thanks, guys.